The year 2020 connotes divergent views depending on which side you stand. Of a certainty, it was a year of worldwide reawakening as the coronavirus pandemic changed all predictions and assumptions affecting all spheres of life and deepened uncertainty. The global economy was severely shocked, leading to a steep recession, a record not set in decades, and Nigeria, being an integral part of the picture, was not spared. It was a health crisis with broader economic implications.
The nature of the pandemic was both managing the health crisis, but also managing an economic crisis that came out of it. The fact that countries had to lock down, and in Nigeria also we felt the impact. We had to lock down in quite a number of states, but the global economy also was literally standing still in terms of trade. So countries were not buying and selling. Major export product, crude oil, was not selling. Even when you produce, you only store. So we got to a point when we were not able to sell at all. And that means monies were not coming in.
As the pandemic sets in, it pronounced the dearth in critical infrastructure affecting productivity, health, and education, with concerns over rapid population growth, unemployment, and underemployment, along with rising debt levels.
2020 also wasn't just hit by COVID. In Nigeria, it affected us also on the economic side due to the crash in the crude oil price in the international market. This meant we're coping with a health pandemic that required more spending, and with a crash in revenue that meant we had very little resources. So the revenue crash was as much as in the oil sector was as much as 65%. So it was very difficult fiscal challenge to manage. And what we did was we had to step back and review our plans. We cut out non-essential expenditure and revised our medium-term plan, revised our budget, and increased spending in the health sector and other supporting sectors.
This was a pandemic within a pandemic. It started first as a health pandemic, gradually dovetailed into being an economic pandemic. At some point, you will see it as a security pandemic. So it went beyond health. And when you look at the fact that the economy had done well for 12 consecutive cycles, maintaining a positive GDP after 5 negatives that it had that led us to the recession, we were now looking forward to jump-starting the economy and increasing the GDP performance over and beyond what it was. So with COVID, it meant that the revenues that were going to come were going to fall, because we had a 67% drop in revenue as a result of the fact that oil, which was our mainstay, the demand had fallen, the supply was in excess, the market was glutted, and so the price drastically fell. And OPEC and OPEC Plus had to come up with measures to shore up the prices. And one of the things they had to do was to reduce our quotas. And you know, for revenue, it's a function of quantity and the price. So just like Fela would say, there was a double wahala for dead body.
New borrowing in the revised 2020 Appropriation Act became 4.2 trillion naira. And to ensure, because government now had to spend more against the background of lower revenues. Meaning your expenditure grew, but your revenues were even declined. The revenues had declined, so we needed to borrow more. But the good thing that the government did is we still tried to rework the budget so that the overall size of the budget was still within limit. Otherwise, the new borrowing would have been much higher. So even 4.2 trillion naira was relatively small. But what we then did was 2.3 trillion out of that we raised from the domestic market. Then for the external, it then had to be the concessional loans from the multilaterals and bilaterals.
The present administration had since inception prioritized revenue generation and diversification before the onset of the pandemic. The subsequent drop in revenue propelled the Buhari-led administration to review the 2020 budget twice, and remarkably, the 2021 budget, despite lockdowns and restrictions, became effective January 1st, like that of 2020. Themed the Budget of Economic Recovery and Resilience, the 2021 budget is designed to deliver on government's economic sustainability plan goals, accelerate the pace of Nigeria's economic recovery, promote economic diversification, enhance competitiveness, and ensure social inclusion.
Within those challenges, we also saw some opportunities that further down the line we will look back and say COVID-19 actually was a positive turning point, at least in the health sector in Nigeria, because the opportunity we had was we had to take stock of the healthcare infrastructure that we have in the country, and the situation was very dire. It was an opportunity that we have had then to upgrade healthcare infrastructure, supporting the states, making sure that every tertiary hospital in the country was provided with resources to upgrade some basic infrastructure, to prepare isolation centers, to set up molecular labs, and also re-equip and even train the healthcare personnel. We also had to look out for the welfare of the healthcare personnel by making sure that they had life insurance covers to, in the case of eventuality, that their families are protected. We also use the opportunity to take out non-essential expenditure. So we say no new buildings, no new vehicles because these are things that can wait for when things are better. We also had to cut down on investments that the National Petroleum Company does on investment in the expansion of the oil and gas business in Nigeria, because that also could wait, and it could be the period of the contracts were simply stretched out longer. It provided relief.
Initially, I used to get complaints, oh, there's no second Niger bridge project going on. Now people go and say, oh, when will you finish, right? At least the bridge is coming up. So you seem hiring people. And there's Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, by the way, which we're now close to 69% completed. And we're hoping to finish that soon as well. So there's a lot going on there. People are employed. You're seeing improvement in infrastructure. Abuja-Kano Road, scope is changing. But once it's changed, you can see that also employing loads and loads of people. So I think it's had a direct impact. But where I believe, and this is probably one of the things the NSI will be known for, is healthcare. We saw people who could not go abroad for cancer treatment finally having to come to our center. Because what happened with COVID was you could not go anywhere.
We started early enough to release capital budgets for implementation. Even with COVID, when you look at the releases we did last year, was about 1.7 trillion, much higher than we have ever done. So you could have imagined if we didn't have a pandemic, what would have happened? We would have realized that we have had to extend the implementation period for the 2020 budget because of the shutdowns. Most of the MDAs could not quicken their procurement process. So for me, the early releases that we did and the sustainability plan was the icing on the cake.
The Nigerian Economic Sustainability Plan, NESP, is a 12-month, 2.3 trillion naira transit plan between the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, ERGP, and the successor plan, to the ERGP, which is currently in development.
Take into cognizance the various diversities that we have in our country. Because if you put only engineers in a room, they can only think like engineers. So you need to have a multifunctional team so that we can discuss, we can judge, we can argue, and then agree to put a plan together that works for all. Like I've said in some other forum, when you participate in the building of a house, in the planning of it, you understand the various rooms in the house and how they function. In the same way, with a national plan, when you participate in the development, you understand it, and then it's also easier for you to implement. I do believe that this plan is different from the ones we've had in the past, and that's the level of success will be much better, especially given that the plan was also being developed at a time that things were difficult.
The NESP was funded through a 500 billion naira from special federal government accounts, 1.1 trillion naira from the Central Bank of Nigeria in the form of structured lending, 334 billion naira from external bilateral and multilateral sources, as well as 302.9 billion naira from other funding sources.
Provided relief, we in turn need to support the states. The states had a number of obligations that were provided by the federal government in terms of budget support and other loans provided by the central bank. We gave them relief in the form of suspending the debt service obligation, so that the funds that go to them will go to them in full without any deductions. And part of the plan we had was giving every state a certain amount of money. For Lagos State, that was first hit, that had the highest case loads, they got 10 billion. Some other states got 5 billion, but every state had at least 1 billion naira that was provided to directly intervene, in addition to the upgrade of tertiary hospitals that the federal government was itself undertaking. The PTF was a unique setup that really helped to drive the improvement or the management of the health side of the pandemic.
That creative industry financial initiative, which is primarily for the youth. Almost close to about 3.5 billion naira has been disbursed. Our AXMIS fund, right, is substantially being disbursed to people in this age. I would imagine that AXMIS fund, where we are disbursed almost close to about 150 billion naira, has been disbursed to nothing less than 60% of the people in this bracket. 3. Only recently, like I said, the president gave approval for the repositioning, rebuilding, and renewal of National Arts Theatre. Aside from renewing and repositioning National Arts Theatre, 4 economic hubs are to be built around the National Arts Theatre for movie, for music, for fashion design, and for ICT software development. These projects, which will be a total urban renewal for Lagos, and after being completed, will go to another one will be established somewhere in the north, another one in the southeast, south area. It's going to be costing the bankers committee, not the government, not the CBN, over 40 billion naira.
While funds were being injected, diversifying the nation's revenue source away from oil remains paramount, as oil accounts for over 80% of exports, a third of banking sector credit, and half of government revenues.
Revenue performance is still a very significant challenge that we have in the Nigerian economy today. With a revenue to GDP ratio of 8% to GDP, it is one of the lowest amongst our comparators. And what COVID-19 did was it dropped that 8% to GDP down to 6%. So there was a setback. But the SRGI that we rolled out since January, since January 2019, saw us improving in revenue performance gradually, despite the crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic crisis that we went through. In 2018, the average revenue performance was about 55%, and the year before that was about 52%. 2020, the average revenue performance was 77%. So despite the pandemic, the impact of the SRGI was incremental performance of all of the revenue generating agencies. The expenditure on the other side is growing at a faster rate, but when you look at where we start, the revenue is increasing exponentially. We've been able to meet some of the targets of the SRGI. Like you said, the SRGI is designed around 3 thematic areas. One of them is increasing the efficiency of the revenue collection process and increasing revenues. Another area was identifying new revenue streams and putting them to work, and then creating a cohesion between our people and the tools that we use.
What we have done is we have identified new revenue streams, and government is currently working on approving them for us to be able to collect. They are not going to come up as a new tax burden to Nigerians. These are things that Nigerians are already paying, but government wasn't aware of it, and we feel we should deploy technology so that this tax that Nigerians have been paying, which government has not been getting because the government wasn't aware of it, we should now be able to deploy technology and use it to improve our revenue collection capacity. What we have also done is to collaborate with stakeholders, because we discovered that yes, we are doing on daily basis, we register taxpayers on daily basis, but we also realize that we have other agencies of government that have huge data that we can leverage on for purpose of tax administration. So what we have done together with JTB is to ensure a process, to put in a process for which we intend to harmonize both the BVN, the bank verification number they call it at the banking level, and the tax identification number which is at FIRS level, and the new one which is the national identification number which is at Ministry of Communication level. So when we harmonize this data, we are hopeful that we are going to increase the data, the tax base, and it will mean more revenue, particularly the indirect tax I have been talking about for the government.
Able to net 1.5 trillion. So to me, with regards to revenue, is a success. And I think this is attributable to quite a number of variables. We were expecting, of course, that the COVID-19 will slow down the process and probably reduce the revenue. But unfortunately for us, that did not happen. And we are lucky that the imports continues and we're able to generate that revenue. Even with the land border closure, we are able to surpass what was given to us by federal government as target.
With concerted efforts, Nigeria emerged from recession faster than expected by the end of 2020. Real gross domestic product GDP recorded a growth rate of 0.11% year-on-year in the fourth quarter of 2020. The improved performance was propelled by the non-oil sector. Major drivers were quarrying and other minerals, which grew by 48.42%, and the ICT subsector, which grew by 17.64%.
To see or start to see a shift away into more renewables and clean energy, right? So this is a short-term trade for 2021, but I think you're going to see more shift away back to renewables and clean energy. And those are the things that I think will shape the world. Last year, you saw oil price drop to 27, even below in some cases. Today it's 60, right? So it's going to be a whole bunch of changes going on. I think you're going to see more movement in what they call consumer discretionary, because the last 12 months, not many people went on holiday, people didn't travel, so airline stocks and things like that came down. When the vaccination program improves, expect to see that come back up.
The federal government is issuing promissory notes. And at some point, that figure was 1.5 trillion naira of the debt stock. So they've started maturing, so the volume now is slightly less than 1 trillion naira. But these promissory notes are not for borrowing purposes. They represent liabilities of the government from previous years, which we are now trying to address by issuing government promissory note. What does it do for the economy? Those various construction companies, exporters that the federal government was owing, and we were just like, okay, when we have money, we'll pay. Now we're giving them government paper, which they can go to any bank to sell and get immediate cash or hold to maturity, and they know that it will be paid. It's not on a best effort basis. There's a definite date of payment. So the idea is also to use those promissory notes to stimulate the economy. So if they want to cash it, they go to the bank and say, it's a federal government paper like an FGN bond. So they can get money and go invest in their business. Okay, so we should note that when we say that stock is growing, there's always also that component that is not new borrowing. It is actually outstanding debt of the government, and these were prior to 2017.
A combination of fiscal and monetary policies designed to promote productivity, generate income, and sustain growth, particularly from non-oil sources, were responsible for the short journey out of recession.
There is going to be free movement of goods and services. And if there is free movement of goods and services, that is to say, more of these goods from our neighboring or our other African countries will be coming into Nigeria without any obstacle. And that will improve consumption by our citizens. And when the consumption by our citizens improve, the indirect tax we talk about will come in. So the more our citizens spend money, the more of these indirect taxes that we are going to be able to collect. And for me, that I'll be in a position to export my services without any hindrance. When I come back to Nigeria, the tax authorities in the respective state where I'm resident will now be in a position to say, welcome back. What is the share of the state government in that which you have freely gone out of this country to render to the client in another jurisdiction within the African continent. So surely it's a win-win. It will improve our capacity to produce, to export, and it will also ease the businessman capacity or ability to bring in goods without hindrance to Nigeria, which will further improve our consumption base and the taxes that will be paid going forward.
As long as people bring in the goods, we will be there to be able to do the examination, to give them the bill that they are supposed to pay and pay. If you realize we did quite a lot in looking at the economy. How best can we also, as custom, be able to contribute? And that's what eventually emanated into the reduction of duty and levies on vehicle. We felt we needed to. This is the period of palliative. Transportation is one of our biggest problems in Nigeria. Most of the rising cost of goods in Nigeria today is as a result of transportation. Because if you are to move goods from Lagos to Kaduna on a trailer, you know how much you pay. Despite in addition to that, all our haulage vehicles are almost dead. By the time you take a vehicle, you hire a vehicle from Lagos to bring your goods to Kaduna, it will spend 2 weeks. 2 weeks, because it dies on the way. So we now looked at it and said, how best can we contribute? If we reduce the levies and duties on these vehicles, it would then mean that those who brings in this vehicle will bring in better performing vehicles, because the likely cost is lower, and then the duty is lower. And also those who will buy it here will also buy it at a relatively substantial price. And that will boost not only the transportation, but also the economy, because then people would go about doing their business faster and quicker.
Consultation. So the priorities remain the same. We want to become an industrialized nation. We want to make sure we have food security. We want to make sure we have energy sufficiency. So those things are basic things that every country, developing country, will aspire to. And we'll continue to push those targets that are contained in our plans, where we now have a directive by Mr. President to pay special attention on reduction of poverty.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, say the cooperation of the citizen is highly needed to achieve the projected economic development.